Hey everyone, and thank you for coming to today's Search Engine Journal webinar. So happy to have you here with us. I am joined by Shrikant Lanka, SVP of Digital Solutions at iQuanti. iQuanti is definitely not a what is the word I'm looking for? A stranger around here. Oh my goodness. So Shrikant, thank you for being with us here.
Thank you, Heather, for having me.
Awesome. So today we are going to talk about thinking beyond search and ways that other top channels and emerging trends that you all can use to grow your brand. So I'm going to go through some quick housekeeping, and then I'm going to turn it over to Shrikant to get us started. So first, if you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to let us know. If you have questions, we're going to take those at the end of the presentation. Oh, there's a little Q&A tab if you want to throw your questions in there. If you see a question that you like, give it a little thumbs up, and that tells us something. It's something that the majority of you out there are interested in. So we'll answer, like I said, as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. There's also closed captioning. It's the little CC in the top right corner of your screen, and use hashtag SEJ webinars to share any cool tidbits from today's learnings on social. After the webinar, if you can stick around and take a short survey for us, it takes about a minute or so, and it really just helps us gauge how successful this webinar was and how we can make them more useful for you going forward. All right, last thing from me, and then I'm out of here. You will absolutely receive this presentation, the deck, the recording in your inbox later today, so watch for that. And Shrikant, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back at the Q&A.
Cool. Thanks, Heather. So good afternoon, everybody. For folks in the US, I am speaking from India, which is a little late in the night, but super excited to be here. A little bit about myself, just as context. So I lead what we call a solutions at iQuanti. Primarily, the objective function of my team is to provide insights and provide expertise around owned, earned, and paid media for our key clients. And iQuanti as a firm focuses on digital strategies all the way to campaign execution. So pre-iQuanti, I spent close to a decade at Google in various roles, last one being leading the programmatic account strategy. And I also speak at a few business schools. So that's a little bit of myself. I'm super excited about this topic. And as we were discussing with the SCJ team, one of the questions that we were trying to answer as we thought about this is, more often than not, we have seen a lot of people think about paid media, think about search first, right? And what we have noticed or have observed is the search in itself is changing a whole lot. It's driving some of this thinking of ours, and to say, okay, do we really need, do our marketers really understand what they need to do beyond search? Where are their users? What are the things that their needs? What are the user needs? What are the segments that are there? What are media channels that are influencing consumer journey? What are the trends that we are seeing? And what are a few things that we wanted to talk about? And as we doodled on this, we ended up with this specific topic of saying, okay, think beyond search, because more often than not, as I was mentioning early on, most of our clients are focused heavily on search, which is a good thing because we all are ROI focused as much as any marketer out there. But we also need to understand what's the current state. So today's webinar will be discussing the following topics. What is current state? Why do we need to look at search? Why do we need to think beyond search? And what is happening from a user perspective? What are the user needs, expectations? What are the media channels that we are seeing which are influencing this discussion of ours? And takeaways also of aligning media mix and understanding where your audience is. So that's a little bit of the context of this session. And as Heather mentioned, please feel free to ask any questions. We'll try to address them at the end of the call, end of this presentation. So before we get started, the first section of this is overview of the search landscape. And before we get started, wanted to get a sense from you guys as to how much search constitutes in your overall media mix as it stands in 2023. Is it 75% or more? Is it between 50 and 75? Is it less than 25? How do you think about this?
So that poll should pop up for most of our attendees. If it doesn't, there is a polls tab where you can go in and see this. And so far, we've got just shy of 60% saying B, 51 to 75%. So we'll let a few more of those come in.
Sure.
Yeah, it seems to be hovering right there. We've got about, almost 50% of people staying within that 51 to 75%. You get 30% saying A, greater than 75, and the remaining, 10 and 15% saying B and C.
Cool. So let's give it a minute or so. But what this data and what you are telling is also reflective of what we are seeing in the industry. A heavy dose of dependence on search. And not necessarily that it's a bad thing, but as things are evolving, as markets are evolving, as users are evolving, is there things that we need to understand? Do we need to think about what is there beyond search, right? So that's the question that I wanted to ask you guys. And the reason why we wanted to do this is a few things, right? If you look at search, search queries are continuing to evolve. More often than not, we all focus on the head terms. We don't necessarily think about the long tail keywords, which are 70% odd, which are new terms which are coming about. Users are not necessarily searching for the same things that they used to search, let's say 5-10 years back. People have moved from keywords to actually talking about conversations. They actually have meaningful dialogues with their search engines. And those are things that we don't necessarily are able to capture as we're thinking about what is the keywords that we want to bid on. And also, it used to be a single session. Now, search journeys itself are like over multiple sessions. And as you can imagine, during the pandemic, we have seen a whole lot of near me, best of, and those kinds of mid-funnel searches taking on center stage. So a lot of search changes are happening and primarily moving away from key terms to more generic terms, if you will. The second change on the search landscape, if you think about it, is the bidding strategies that have changed over, primarily driven by the Google ecosystem. When I say Google, I'm not necessarily referring to just Google. Bing is a fast follower, so everything that Google does, Bing is also doing on the bidding strategy and see few things. ChatGPT excluded, we'll talk about that as well. But from a bidding strategy, this is similar. So what I want to highlight here is think about 10 years back. If you were a search marketer 10 years back, bidding was pretty simple, right? You had a specific keyword, you specified a specific bid, and then based on the likelihood that the keyword would convert, and you were looking at last click attribution in some ways across desktop on a single session. Fast forward to a few years later, mobile came along, and then you had more signals, right, which marketers need to account for, such as device, location, audiences, day of the week, time of day, and all of that bits. And that made it more complex. And now think about where we are at. Today, we are able to track many more signals, right, than before. And this wide breadth of data that comes about actually makes it more complex, but also gives an opportunity to leverage a lot of the AI modules that exist in some ways. So it's important for us to think about bidding strategically to basically a unique combination of what the user is looking for. And so from a search perspective, right, we started out with exact match, then we went with broad match, with smart bidding, and then we're journeying towards keywordless AI. And if you combine that with Performance Max, which is used to improve keywordless AI, this is going to be providing additive search opportunities. So there is change that's happening in that landscape. And that kind of is moving away from the keyword ecosystem, a keyword first ecosystem, if you will. The other bit of change, which is common, but which is known in some ways, but worth noting, is that for some mature verticals, think of e-commerce or think of travel or even social media, search engines are not necessarily the first port of call. We are seeing a lot of places, statistic data here. What we are seeing is sources where people are actually searching for products in 2022. It's driven by what you know. So you don't necessarily go to google.com to search for Facebook or to go to google.com to search for Amazon. Your journey usually starts on those platforms. And what we are seeing is 28% of all online product searches are starting in marketplaces such as Amazon or eBay. This is known, but sometimes it's good to refer back to make sure that we are all aligned on that same thing. And that kind of is moving away from search in some ways. The next bit, if you will, is something that all of us are excited about, all of us have been talking about in terms of the evolution, if you will, on the SERP, primarily driven by generative AI, ChatGPT, BART, and all of these changes are things which are going to change the face of search, in our opinion. At iQuanti, we've been testing some of these things, some of these models to figure out what are the potential use cases, what are best practices, how can we work with this, what are the opportunities/implications for a marketer. And we've been watching this space very closely. And from our perspective, the exact implications, if you will, on SERP landscape is not necessarily known. The few models that we have tested or the few beta prototypes that we have tested kind of indicate that it's going to act similar to, let's say, an answer box, but it's not necessarily that the answer box data is going to come from a specific website. It might be things that might be cobbled around from different websites. And if you look at the image on the right side of the screen, you would see a set of links there at the bottom, which kind of tell you where this data is pulled from. And that's going to be your key real estate in terms of making sure that your links in some ways are listed there. But overall, the implications of this are pretty significant in terms of paid search, organic further down, all of these moving down. And I presume, like in 6 months or 9 months, if you were discussing about SERP and the layout of search, it's going to be completely different. So net, what wanted to impress on you that search as a product has been changing, and it's not necessarily what it was before. That's the reason why we want to think beyond search. And one of the other bits that we are seeing is the needs of the audiences, the segments of where they're working, what are their interests, what are things that are happening. And a few pointers on that. One of the key things that we have looked at is the emergence, if you will, of the Gen Z consumer segment. It's becoming one of the most dominant customer segments, as you are aware. And what we have seen is there'll be more adult Gen Zers than adolescent Gen Zers for the first time. And I have kids who are Gen Zers, and I completely understand some of the implications of what we're stating here. They have a very, very low attention span. It's just about 1.3 seconds. Even before you say something, they're off, and then they already had made their mind, or they have decided that this is not for them or this is for them. And that's why we are seeing emergence or adoption, if you will. Gen Zs are frequenting through platforms which have shorter ad formats, wherein they don't necessarily have to sit and wait through things. Skippables, like what we're seeing on the YouTube side, vertical scrolling on TikTok, all of these are catering towards the Gen Z expectations. However, one of the key things that we also realized is Gen Zers are moving to starting their journey, if you will, their user journey on various things, on short form videos, as opposed to thinking about going from a traditional way of what we used to do on the digital side, as search on, you start your journey on search, think about things, and then get influenced in other channels, look at YouTube videos, look at social and all of that. And that's not necessarily what we're seeing. And on the chart on the right side, what you're seeing is social platforms and then their expectations, if you will, between Gen Z versus non-Gen Z. And as you can see that when the duration of the ad format is smaller, like Snap, TikTok, Insta, and YouTube, the usage of Gen Z, US Gen Z, is much, much higher. And that's kind of trickles down when it comes to Facebooks, if you will, and linear TV, if you will. And that is indicative wherein, if you think about the narrative that we are hearing, is Facebook is for senior people, senior citizens. It's not necessarily something that's cool amongst the Gen Z at all. So that's the first trend that we are seeing. The second one, continuing on these, is we are also seeing as verticals that are evolving as consumer behavior is shifting. Basically, one of the key drivers of that is Gen Zs are not necessarily loyal to any brands or any retailers. They have a high dependence on social commerce. They are looking at what can they do in channels which they believe in. Click and collect is something that's going out significantly. And the other bit is around mobile app installs, wherein much more money is being spent in terms of driving around 25% of ad spend increase from last year. These are things that we are seeing much more than before. So combination of a emerging more adult Gen Z population with their with their attention span, combined with new formats that are coming about, are leading to significant consumer shifts across verticals that we are seeing. In addition to that, one of the biggest changes that we have seen in this is the emergence, if you will, of social media across various parts of the marketing funnel in terms of their customer journey. One of the key metrics that we have seen is like how 55% of US-based social media users have started directly buying from social platforms. Social commerce is becoming a big thing. And the second bit is around how social media also is being looked at as a starting point, if you will, for product services research and trying to understand some of these things. And if you combine that in terms of the newer platforms that are there in the short form content that are coming about, this kind of gives you a sense to say what is changing and what are some of the key things that are happening in this. So a few trends that we are seeing is social video is growing significantly, roughly at around 22% growth rate, and accounting for all of the social networks ad revenue. And what this is pretty much, think of YouTube, think of which is also considered social in some ways, YouTube, Facebook, Insta, and all of those channels, their growth rate in terms has significantly grown. The second bit on those lines also is the short form video, which is videos under, let's say, 60 seconds. And YouTube videos under 60 seconds have grown like 135% over last year. And that kind of gives you a sense to say what is the magnitude, if you will, of this explosion of short form video. The third one is connected TV. This has been something that we have seen over the pandemic, significant uptick adoption, if you will. And this has grown from, let's say, 27% roughly, which is a combination of OTT and CTV ad spending, and it's supposed to go 49-50%. So this growth rate is supposed to decrease a little bit, but still it's much more higher than what it was happening. And this is all, if you think back to how you are spending time as a user and put yourself in, not necessarily as a marketer, but yourself as a user, you'd see that this is reflective of what we are consuming media today. How are we consuming media today? And these are things that we are seeing as emerging trends. The last bit, which is important also, is to understand the emergence, if you will, of TikTok and how that has grown significantly. As recently as March, which was the data that we found more recently, or spoken to TikTok and found more recently, we see that 150 million confirmed users TikTok has in the US, and that's in some ways a cause of concern for some of the more traditional traditional digital marketers like Meta and Google. It's funny in my own head when I call them more traditional compared to TikTok, because they were the emerging players like a few years back, and today they are being challenged, if you will, by TikTok on one side on the short form content, and they have seen significant efforts that Meta and Google have made to figure out how do they get new content onto that platform and not necessarily worry about monetizing, but get more users onto that platform. And that's something that we are continuing to see as a key driver, if you will, in terms of how this is changing. The next one on the same one, just double clicking on the short form video, is driven by what we are seeing as why is this working in some ways. We started looking at that, and what we see is the content on short form videos is emerging to be primarily more engaging. And as we compare it to, let's say, 2 years back, pre-pandemic, what we are seeing is consumers, not just in the Gen Z or the younger generations, but also folks in the 20 to 54 age generations are seeing a short form consumption to be much more. And what when we looked at some of the research, what we found was it's looked at 2.5 times more engaging than long form video. Right. So this is where, when we speak to marketers, they realize and they agree with us in terms of saying video becomes the most valuable content, if you will, for not just your social media goals, but across everything. And we have our own content team. And when we start thinking about content as an important driver for how does this fit in, one of the questions that we are speaking to marketers is, yes, we understand long form content, text-driven content. But what is more engaging is, like, let's say, social media content, infographics, video content, and they want to move on that narrative. because one of the New York Times articles quoted this, and it's similar to the discussion that I had with one of the Gen Zers. Is yes, I understand I can read a let's say 500-word article about how a restaurant looks like, how does food look like, what's the ambience, what's the lighting, what's the mood, or I can watch, let's say, a 10-second video of the same thing and get the same exact experience. I would much rather do that than having to read a 1,500-word article. And this completely goes to their attention span and their need for, if you will, getting content in a much more quicker way and in ways that they consume, because they being digital natives, they're used to this form and they're not necessarily expecting it to be something that's new. Net, all of these is not just about engagement, or it's not just about mid-funnel content, but it's also about ensuring that we're looking at bottom line of how is it driving, if you will, sales as a key metric. And we have seen that video as a success metric is very important, and we've seen 26% of that. So that is what we are seeing from key channels, if you will, user trends, if you will. Want to get a sense from you guys as to, do you see TikTok, OTT, connected TV features in your media strategy? Or is it something that you want to plan for the future? Have you even considered that as you're thinking about your media models? And what is it that you are hearing or speaking to when you understand? So would love to understand a quick sense from yes, you see it, or no, you don't see it, and or you're not sure and you need to understand whether there's a fit. Love to get a sense from you guys.
So far we got about 70% of those coming in saying yes. But Shrikant, I noticed a question that came through the chat, and Ruth wanted to know that if the stats that you've been showing, are they from iQuanti research?
So it's a combination of some other stuff. It's not just iQuanti research. We have a mix of clients who are both in primarily in performance marketing, both around financial services and e-commerce. But some of the data that we're showing is a mix of iQuanti research and secondary research that we have gathered. So we have listed down some of the sources for some of the research that we have picked up, but not everything is iQuanti research.
Okay, perfect. So they'll be able to see that when they get the deck later. So, okay, so let's see. How did this poll shake out? We've got 63% saying yes, 23% saying no, and 14% saying not sure. They need to consult where to find the fit.
Cool. And that's it. And that's the reality, right? So as users are trying to understand where things are, where people are, and that's something that we need to look at and try to look at that media mix, if you will. So I mentioned about users, I mentioned about search. Coming to the third part of this journey, if you will, in terms of what media channels are influencing this consumer journey, right? So one of the key emerging trends for most marketers is the retail media networks and potentially the impact that they're going to have, if you will, in digital advertising. And from what we have seen is this is a trend that's completely new, and this has come about literally in the last, I'd say, couple of years. 2021, it was much lower at around, let's say, 31 odd billion, but now it's expected to go up to 60 odd billion. So that's huge, right? And the way this works is retail media advertising primarily is about advertising your products, if you will, on the retailers' websites, apps, physical stores. And this could include display ads, video sponsored, email, and all of that bits. And we in some ways are assuming that this is going to go significantly in the next couple of years. And the key reason for that is also driven by some of the changes that we are seeing in the user behavior. While we don't have much on this topic in this webinar, but one of the key trends that we are seeing is the dichotomy, if you will, of users dichotomy, if you will, across privacy and personalization. What I mean by that is the users are asking for more privacy in terms of data not necessarily being shared. At the same time, they want very, very personalized content. And how do you achieve that? You can only achieve that if you have real solid first-party data. And some of the retailers that we're talking about, the big box retailers, they have very, very sound first-party data. And now they're starting to figure out, can I monetize this first party data? And the way they're monetizing it is saying, we will not necessarily sell this data out somewhere else, but we will provide our, they're becoming publishers, right? They'll provide their properties, if you will, and ad units and ad slots for others to market to these guys. And that's something that we see as an important angle, which is going to be kicking in much more. The key challenge, however, is as with Google, Facebook, and some of the social media channels, is making sure that we don't necessarily over-invest, over-engineer some of these things, and then we're trying to measure, which is going to be much more difficult. And then you need to have the right, if you will, right cut of what kind of reporting you want, how do you look at it, and how do you figure out the contextually relevant ads that are needed. So this is the big wave that we are expecting to see. And while this is not necessarily playing out in the metrics that we are seeing across a few channels that's there in push media, this is something that we forecast to be much more prominent. And when we saw some of the push media channels, it's maybe the reporting that we are looking at, we didn't necessarily find it, but this gives you a sense to say, okay, where was, let's say, retail, push media retail in 2020, Q1 of 2020, which is on the left side of this of your screen, and then Q1 of 2023. And if you can see this, as you can see on the screen, Q1 2020, we had roughly around 3-4 channels, Facebook being the most significant one on the push media side of things, with roughly around 52%, display at 32%, video at 15%, and Twitter much smaller. Fast forward 3 years later, what you're seeing is much more diversified media, right? Media spends. Facebook coming down, Instagram going up. You could argue Facebook and Instagram are the same things, but clearly the formats are different, and then the audiences are much more different. TikTok, Snapchat, OTT video, all kicking in, rather OTT kicking in, video and display going much, much smaller. And this is the trend that we have seen across multiple verticals. We at iQuanti, we focus on financial services, a whole lot of some of our work that we do. And in that vertical, however, some of the challenges that we're seeing with regulatory, and similarly with other healthcare pharma verticals, where regulation is a big an important aspect of how you can advertise. We are seeing Facebook not necessarily as dominant as it was in other places, but overall we see this trend holding up, wherein the social channels are kicking in much more than what others are. So moving further along, we also started to look at the same trends, if you will, on CPG vertical. And then when we saw the metrics on the CPG side of things, it didn't look much different than what we saw on the retail side. And it's also indicative of what we are seeing in other channels as well. Overall, some channels getting much, much smaller. And then we are seeing the other social channels, the smaller ones, adopting. When we speak to marketers around this, the key thing is they're starting to understand the value that they're coming about. And more often than not, the reach that was promised in some of the earlier channels, they're not necessarily getting the same reach. And also because of market saturation, we're seeing that the CPMs that they have to pay and the price that they have to pay on some of these channels is being much higher. So they're starting to move away or diversify away from some of the more expensive, highly competitive channels to more media where we are seeing their right users being, and then starting to understand that and trying to look at saying, okay, here is what we think the spend should be. Here is what we think the spend should look like. So with that said, here are a few key takeaways for you guys. And this is across the whole marketing funnel, if you will, right? From if you think about your top funnel activities, understand what videos you are presenting, drive awareness and recall for sure. You have to look at your mid funnel, similar to what we have been doing on static images, and then looking at traffic. And the other bit is on the bottom funnel, right? You definitely need to spend in search. The key point that I want to highlight, which is where we have been in some ways, is go back to the first poll that we did. We saw 50% or more spends on search. Now the question is, as we're starting to move away from last click to more data-driven attribution, You need to understand the full impact of all of the channels that are having, and then figure out what is the right investment that you have to make. And what in our analysis, our understanding of things, we are seeing that spend to be going down more. Than is not necessarily as high as it used to be. And what is surprising though is when we speak to marketers, senior folks at large firms as well, they more often than not rely on last click, and they don't necessarily look at data-driven attribution. What is surprising on the flip side though is smaller marketers are more savvy in some of these areas. And if you have a full funnel attribution across what is happening across your upper, lower, and mid funnels, and using a good tech stack, you have a better sense of where you're spending and how you're looking at it. And the KPIs that we definitely want to look at for your different channel spaces is look at understand recall, understand lift, look at your top of mind awareness, look at engagement rates and retention rates, and not just about looking at CPA, ROAS, or a lifetime value and CAC. These are good metrics, but there are other metrics that you need to combine. Overall, the way our approach has been is to ensure that you have a set of KPIs per funnel stage for different parts of your funnel. Get a sense of your overall CAC. It's your cost of acquisition. It's not just on your lower funnel. It's your full funnel cost of acquisition across all of your marketing channels. Attribution, from our perspective, is going to get a little bit more difficult as it stands, but you need to understand there is value in trying to look at incrementality. Where are you today? Where are you going to be? Where is your next dollar that you're going to be spending? And towards that, you also need to ensure that your content that you have at each funnel stage is matching to what you're trying to target in that. So over the net of all of this is, one, understand your users, understand their journey. Do you have a clear sense of what is their current user journey? Is it updated? Is it recent? If not, do some market research, use some focus groups, look at how you measure that, and what are the channels that they are spending time on. You can get you can get a lot of consulting engagements who can help you with figuring out what is my media mix looking like. Do I have a good sense of my media mix for my industry, my subsector, my sub-vertical, if you will, at whatever level of granularity you want to cut it, and then try to put in your own media mix model, and then see does it align? Do I have a good sense of where my users are, and am I spending relatively equal amounts of money on those channels which are important? The other question that we continue to keep getting asked is, hey, Shrikant, low funnel is getting more expensive. How can you solve for this? Right? Or we are hearing questions like, I'm not necessarily sure where my users are. How can you help us think about things? So it boils down to one-on-one kind of questions. Is, have you mapped your user journey? Have you looked at that? Have you made sure that you have then managed your media based on your user consumption of that media? What I'm telling you is as old as the hills. It's not something new, but sometimes a good reminder of this is important. Trying to understand your user journey and mapping your media mix to make it work towards that. With that, wanted to understand from you if you are thinking about beyond search towards a more dynamic media mix, or is it something that you don't necessarily have in plans, or you have already moved?
So those are just starting to come through. A little bit slower on the lag for this one. So let's see where they come. Here we go. So far we've got 2 saying B, yes, it doesn't require strategic consultation. And then kind of a mixture of about 10% on A and C. We got 40% on D already moved. So B and D are your winners in this one.
Got it. Cool. Are you going? Do you want to wait for a couple of more minutes, Heather? For any?
Yeah, I think they're about done. So we ended up with 50% saying B, yes, doesn't require strategic consultation, and about 26% saying D, they already moved. So that's where it's going to shake out.
Cool. So good news in some ways is if you already moved, you don't necessarily need to worry about it. If you haven't, and what we also see is if you have a good measurement tool, you definitely don't require a strategic consultation. You can do it. But the key thing to understand, which is based on the walled gardens that are being set about more so now than before, with the ad tech ecosystems between Facebook's, the Amazons, and the Googles, all operating in their own silos, it's important to understand how are you connecting that journey. And as long as you have that, I think you are sorted. And with that, I'm going to open up for questions that any of you guys might have.
We definitely got some questions for you today. But first, I want to touch real quick. So SS asked if they'd be getting a copy of this deck, and you absolutely will. You said you didn't get it last time, but it should come from the same email for these notifications. So if you got that notification, hopefully that'll come through for you this time. All right, so Shrikant, first of all, I have to say, I have not quite, so I have children, Gen Z as well. And I'm just like, how do they have so many devices going at one time? Like, I mean, like they got a cell phone, there's a tablet, and they're watching the TV. I'm like, what are you actually doing? You know, they got music playing on one. It's too much for me.
So one of the things that I'll add to that, which is more a conundrum of me as a people manager, is Gen Z folks also work on a new device. They have a laptop on which they're working, they're watching Netflix on something else, they're listening to Snap somewhere else, they're listening to Spotify, and they seem to be wired differently, but they are able to give it at least some level of focus across all of these things. And it's a skill that they're innately born with because, like I was mentioning, these are digital natives. Having said that, we all understand that if you are focused on one thing, it's not necessarily easy to look at everything that might be noise. But sometimes when I speak to some of my colleagues who are more the Gen Zs, their perspective is this is white noise. I need that to mute away some of the other things that are happening around, especially when you're sitting in a communal work environment or some of those things. So that's the narrative that we hear. But as you can imagine, as you start going older a little bit, it's not necessarily a demographic kind of a discussion, but you are seeing more focus. But today, Gen Zers, for what it's worth, they are able to juggle between multiple devices, multiple media consumption across hearing, listening, seeing, sometimes even speaking. And they seem to be doing okay with that so far.
Yeah, agreed. Still just blows my mind just a little bit. All right, well, let's get to some of these questions. So a couple questions around TikTok. So Shell asks, since the US is considering, the TikTok ban, what would be the next most important growing platform?
So US is considering the TikTok ban. It's an important one. It's important to understand where it's currently shaking out. There has been a congressional discussion. I believe the CEO of TikTok was invited or asked to come and depose before the Congress, and there is discussion around it, and we don't know where it's going to shake out, right? If I look at the legislation that states some of these, is if you are an international company, you should still be able to do business in the US. Having said that, the challenge that we're hearing is you cannot have US data going to Chinese government, if you will. So that's the key disconnect that's there. Assuming, so it could play out in two ways, right? Multiple ways, rather. First way is nothing happens. TikTok continues to work as is. Congress does not have enough teeth from a legislative perspective to do anything. That's one possibility. The second possibility is what a lot of the big digital firms in the US are also looking for, is like, is that an acquisition opportunity in some ways, wherein TikTok becomes if you will, a sub brand of some other company. And that's what seems to be the direction that some of the Congress is leading towards. Don't know which way it will play out, but that's the second one. And the third thing is TikTok completely shutting down. The first and second would mean no change, if you will, to the user base. The third one will mean there is change to your users. And as you all are aware, like in various countries in the outside the US, TikTok is banned today. India as well. I'm in India today, and TikTok is not necessarily available today. What we are seeing is the next best thing in some ways is Instagram Reels. So we are seeing a whole lot of traffic on Instagram, and all of the traffic, all of the videos that were created fit for TikTok are now showing up on Insta Reels in these countries. So I would assume that to happen again in the US. But you might also see, in some ways, a shift at some point when there is a tipping point of more and more users wanting to move away to a newer platform that could emerge as well. But for now, immediately short term, I assume it's going to be similar to the countries where TikTok has been banned, wherein you would see other formats like Insta taking over.
Great. So Morgan has a good question. Says this is good information related to retail and product marketing. I'm sorry, I'm having issues talking today. How would you recommend expanding to other platforms for services? So how would the content change if they were in a service business?
So if they were not necessarily in the services business, I'm trying to understand. So the question. So basically, you're saying that this is only useful for retail and for some of those channels and e-commerce. I'd argue no, because we have clients who are in the finance vertical. A lot of them, like some of the big banks that we work with, they are as much involved in some of these discussions, and they are trying to change their content as much as possible to meet some of these. As an example, if you think about the most traditional, if you will, roles in the finance industry, is a typical investment advisor or finance consultant. And those are people that you would go to have a consultant like your CPA or CFA, wherein he would tell you what needs to be done and stuff. But today on TikTok and on some of these other channels, you have influencers who are donned the hat, if you will, of digital financial advisors. And you have huge number of followers, and people are flocking to them, and they're listening to that. And now, if you don't necessarily think about those channels of information that are passing about, and they are looking at it because they want some authentic content, which is not necessarily coming about from a branded big player, if you will, in the finance services clients, the big banks. So they're reaching out to those folks, and what we are seeing is that kind of trend in more and more industries, even the most regulated industries, wherein I would rather go to somebody who I trust, and that trust might not necessarily be the brand advocate, if you will, but somebody else who has more followership on some of these emerging channels. That's the way we've been seeing things. So it's not just limited to let's say the product categories or to the retail side of things.
Great. So we have a question from Andre. Do you have any good resources on how people are using generative AI in their journeys, and at what stage of the funnel so far?
So the way we have seen it is generative AI being used in the across the funnel stages, right? The way we've been discussing this is, think of the whole marketing mix. If you think of owned media, earned media, and paid media, so those are the three legs, if you will, from a media perspective. Like I was mentioning early on, paid media has been using AI for quite some time, and that's not something that's new. Earned media as well, if you think of Twitter, Facebook, and some of these channels as being earned media, they have been using AI as well for quite some time. The new thing that's coming about is on the owned media, which might be your websites, your blogs, your content, and all of that. And that's where AI has been starting to be used much more. So that journey is important. And the key thing to realize is some of the narratives that we hear and some of the discussions that we hear is, hey, paid search is becoming much more easier. Absolutely. And then you also hear about organic search has much more intelligence. And it is true, because Google has been investing a whole lot, and Bing and others, think of Nivea as a platform on search, or any of the other platforms. All of them have been investing significant amounts of money in terms of making AI work for them. On the generative AI side, the way it's playing out is to think through, to say, what are the few areas wherein it can help us, right? What we have seen is threefold, right? Few things are in terms of creating new content, which is absolutely true. From a web dev perspective, even building out websites and structure, building out your your wireframes of the websites, and all of that has become much more easier. The second bit also is in terms of understanding how that's playing out with with insights that you might be looking at, in terms of, if I had to think about reports that are coming about from any of these analytics products, I can link them to start writing insights of some of that and make it real time, easily understandable. The third one that we are seeing is the whole DALI experiments and all of that bits, wherein you're starting to create images and stuff from content that you're writing. So combination of all of these, what we're seeing is it's about creating new content, and that seems to be has taken a lot more as an importance more recently because of the emergence of it and the number of people that were touching it or that were influenced by or that were impacted by it, and that is leading to more interest in it. And it's not just about from the marketing angle, right? There are other use cases across various areas. All of that has led to generative AI being picked up as the new thing that we all need to understand and try to look at. But from our perspective, integration of marketing and AI has been happening, if you will, for quite some time. So much so that one of the new things that we are seeing is, how do I do creative integration of AI in terms of, I'm looking at an image now from AI, I'm able to figure out saying, where am I looking at? What is my eye contact? What is which part of that image that you have from a graphic perspective is something that the user has focused on, and in some ways I'm able to drive analytics on that. So a lot of use cases. Generative AI in some ways is just a small portion of it, and it's going to affect SEO more than any of the other channels from our perspective.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that insight. So question from SS, any stats or insights related to Reddit? I'm seeing a lot of brands doing paid promos and Ask Me Anythings there. However, it's still underrated. Main challenge is the negative comments for users. So how can a brand use this platform, being Reddit, to engage and address with their audience?
Great question. And Reddit is something that we didn't necessarily speak about in this, but Reddit is one channel that we are seeing a whole lot of uptick. A lot of people are starting to look at Reddit. And as the person pointed out, I'm sorry, I missed the name. There is also that it's not just about a media which is just pushing information. You also have that earned media angle to it, when you're receiving comments and stuff like that. And that's what honestly makes Reddit more powerful, right? You have that dialogue that's happening, the open dialogue that's happening. But what we are also seeing is a few of our more traditional marketers as well testing out Reddit as a platform. And in some ways it's useful, but the key difference or the key challenge is it does not necessarily have the breadth and reach, if you will, of some of our bigger players that are there. But Reddit is on the horizon that you need to look out for.
Okay. Let's see. Question from Michelle asked if the stats that you were showing were US, North America, or global?
Primarily US driven.
Primarily US.
Yeah.
Okay. So Impana asks, what's the update on how we can use these media channels in B2B? So anything different that we should be looking at?
It's an interesting question, because the way I think about B2B might be contradictory to some of what you might have seen. Who is a B2B client? If you think about really who a B2B client is, I don't see him much different from a B2C client. The last bit of conversion might happen differently, but the user journey of, let's say I am a salesperson at a different company and you're trying to market to me. I don't necessarily go to trade shows as much. Now it's been picking up because the whole IRL kind of a thing kicking off much more than before. But more often than not, I'm going to be doing research online. I'm going to be trying to understand what's happening online before I start doing the last mile or last click or last purchase. So the key difference, if you will, is from a marketing funnel perspective, the upper funnel and mid funnel activities that happen in the marketing ecosystem are very similar from a B2B or a B2C perspective. The last purchase bit does not happen online. It's much rarer. Also, in some B2C industries, it's much more rarer. If you think of a traditional insurance purchase, that does not necessarily happen online because the form is too large, too convoluted, and all of that. But similarly, because of the size of the deal involved, because of the terms and agreements, because of the discounting and all of that, the sale happens maybe in a different platform, but the journey, the first 3 parts of the journey happens very much online, because at the end of the day, your consumer, your customer at a B2B company is still an individual, and more often than not, maybe a Gen Zer. So he's definitely looking at researching everything online before he comes to you or before he's reaching out to you. Even if after reached out to you, the first thing he's doing is going to your website and trying to understand what's happening. So I wouldn't necessarily discount what we have discussed about here using a B2B lens. That's my perspective. Some folks disagree with it, but the way I think about it is like, your user, if you think about really about your user, he is using these channels to do enough research on that before he's even coming to you or speaking to you.
Sure. And it's just, and I agree with you 100%. I'm right there. You know, there's the lines between what used to be B2B and B2C are certainly blurring, and I'm thankful for that. Right. You know, and it's really just a matter of, okay, they're using all these platforms, but do they want to hear from you in a business perspective on that platform? And I think that's what we're trying to figure out in some cases.
Sure.
All right. So I think that we have time for maybe one more question, and then we'll get you out of here, Srikant. You've answered a lot of questions today. So how does measurement evolve in the cookieless world, and what's its implications on a media mix?
So briefly touched on it on the slide. Measurement is going to be more cumbersome. As you can imagine, cookies were used as the de facto, if you will, identifier of how you would measure data, how you would measure what's happening on one ecosystem to the other. And that's going to change. And this is one of the other areas wherein we see AI taking on significantly larger role. And it's already happening in bits and pieces, right? If you think about the Google ecosystem, they started with GA4, which is a new platform, and they use AI in terms of how you measure. And it's not just about actual data, but also some level of predictive modeling that's happening. And similarly, if you think of more ecosystem changes in terms of media mix modeling, larger ones, or multi-touch attribution that might be required, these will be more AI driven. So you need to have models, or you need to go reach out to folks who are actually getting those, building those models for you in leveraging some of the AI models that already exist, and then trying to connect that user journey. Some of it you'll have to take some assumptions, make some calls, but looking at it from that perspective towards ensuring that you have a good enough understanding of that user journey. And the bigger challenge of that is going to be making sure that you understand that user journey, because that's the one, like I was mentioning here, it's going to get more richer, more complex. And with cookies going away, till we get a new identifier, which could be anything that that the industry is going to accept, be it email, be it some other PII data, or it could be a different identifier that Chrome as a browser, which has roughly around 70-80% of the market share, throws out at you. We'll need to wait and watch. But then this is an important aspect where measurement is going to get refined or changed, if you will. And I was very encouraged to see some of the early points around we already have it sorted. But with cookies going away, that's an area that we all need to make sure that your measurement strategy, if you will, is tuned to the new cookieless reality.
Perfect. All right. Well, with that, we've gotten through the majority of the questions. If there's any big ones that we didn't get to, we'll send them over to the iQuanti team to follow up with you all afterwards. But again, Srikant, thank you very much for your time, for sharing your knowledge with us. And yeah, tell the people, how can they find you?
Cool. So reach out to us. Our website is www.iquanti.com. In the website, in the handouts that you'll be getting, you should have a link to our website or email address of ours. So absolutely look forward to hearing if you have any questions or anything. Just email us and we'll be happy to answer.
Perfect. And you all will get a copy of this presentation, the slides, later today in your inbox, to watch for that. And we'll see you on the next SEJ webinar. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, everybody.